Welcome to another far-reaching conversation. Today we're diving into the Federal Acquisition Regulation, the FAR, and specifically we're tackling something really fundamental: contract types. If you're in acquisition or maybe you run a business working with the government, you know this choice is huge. It shapes, well, pretty much everything.
Absolutely. It dictates your budget management, your incentives, and definitely where the risk lands. So our goal here is really to map out how risk gets allocated across three main types. We're talking fixed price level of effort, and labor hour. Getting the differences clear is honestly the key to managing expectations and making sure the risk lands appropriately. It's all laid out in the FAR.
Exactly. And we'll start with the one that offers the most cost certainty for the buyer, where the contractor really shoulders the performance risk. That's fixed price.
Okay, so let's unpack fixed price. What's the core idea here?
Well, the name says a lot, right? Fixed price, defined in FAR subpart 16.2. Simply put, the price agreed upon is the price paid. It doesn't change based on what it actually costs the contractor to do the work. So the buyer knows the exact cost going in. Total predictability, at least on the surface.
Right, and that immediately tells you about the risk profile. It's fascinating, really. Because that price is fixed, the contractor bears basically all the risk of cost overruns.
If they bid too low or run into unexpected problems.
It's their problem. They eat the loss. But flip that coin.
The incentive side.
Exactly. If they're efficient, control costs, well, come in under budget.
That difference is pure profit for them. A very strong motivator.
Huge motivator. But you mentioned on the surface earlier, the buyer isn't entirely risk-free, are they?
No, definitely not. We always talk about the contractor's cost risk, but what about the buyer's risk? If those initial requirements aren't nailed down perfectly, if the scope is vague,
then the buyer pays that fixed price for something that might not actually meet the need. That's a major risk.
Yeah, getting a product that technically meets a poorly written spec, but doesn't solve the real problem.
Precisely. So fixed price really only works well or is suitable when the requirements are super clear, well-defined, and costs can be estimated with reasonable accuracy.
If it's all fuzzy and uncertain, fixed price is probably the wrong tool.
Definitely a recipe for trouble.
And we should mention, it's not just one monolithic thing. There are variations, right? Firm fixed price, FFP, is the most common.
That's the gold standard, totally fixed. But the FAR gives you options. Think about fixed price with economic price adjustment. That's smart for long-term contracts where, say, inflation or material costs could go wild.
Right, like fuel or specific metals over several years. It protects both sides from market volatility using predefined indices.
Exactly, and builds in flexibility based on external factors, not contractor performance.
Let's shift focus. What happens when the government needs expertise or effort but can't precisely define the end result? That leads us to fixed price level of effort, FP-LOE.
Right, FP-LOE covered in FAR 16.207. And this is fundamental shift, like you said. We're moving away from buying a specific thing or outcome.
And buying time, effort.
Exactly. Buying a specified level of effort. So the contract might say the contractor provides, say, 2,000 hours of senior engineering time over the next year. And critically, they get a fixed price for delivering that effort, those 2,000 hours.
Okay, wait. Payment is based on the effort, the hours worked, not whether the project actually succeeds.
That's the core distinction. Payment is tied to delivering the agreed-upon level of effort.
That immediately flips the risk profile, doesn't it?
Completely. The contractor's risk is much lower now. They get paid for their time, basically, even if the research hits a dead end or the prototype doesn't work.
So the buyer holds the bag. The buyer carries the risk that all that effort might not actually produce the desired result.
Correct. The buyer bears the risk that the specified effort might not lead to mission success, which sounds risky, and it is.
So why would you ever use this? It sounds like you could pay for nothing.
Well, it's only suitable for very specific situations. Think R&D, feasibility studies, exploratory work.
Places where the outcome is genuinely unknown at the start. You're paying to find out if something is possible.
Exactly. You can't guarantee success in pure research, but you can contract for a dedicated amount of expert time to investigate.
Okay, but how do you ensure accountability? If success isn't the measure, what is? Are they just, running the clock?
That's the key question for the government monitor. Accountability shifts. It becomes about verifying the effort was actually expended and documenting the process.
So deliverables are sting required.
Oh, absolutely. The contract must specify deliverables, even if it's just things like monthly progress reports, detailed research logs, data sets, analysis findings. The contractor has to prove they delivered the hours and the documentation of what they did during those hours.
So the oversight needs to be pretty tight, making sure the hours are real and the effort is focused.
Very tight. The buyer needs to be actively engaged, monitoring performance, reviewing those reports. If the contractor fails to provide the 2,000 hours or the required reports,
Then they haven't met the contract terms, regardless of the project outcome.
correct. And the FAR is clear. FP-LOE is generally not appropriate for buying commercial items or things where an outcome is reasonably expected.
Makes sense. So an example.
Imagine funding a research team for, say, a 2,000-hour feasibility study on a new potential technology. The fixed price is $200,000. The team does the work, logs the hours, writes the final report. They get paid the $200,000.
Even if the report concludes the technology is completely unworkable.
Even then, the government paid for the answer to the feasibility question delivered through that specified effort. They didn't pay for a guaranteed successful technology.
Got it. A specific tool for a specific uncertain job. All right, let's move to the other end of the spectrum. Maximum flexibility, but also maximum buyer oversight needed. Labor hour contracts.
Yes, labor hour, or LH, defined in FAR 16.602. This is essentially a type of time and materials contract, but focused specifically on acquiring services labor hours.
Used when it's really difficult, maybe even impossible, to estimate the total extent of the labor required up front.
Exactly. Think situations like emergency repairs, ongoing maintenance for complex systems, or maybe on-call technical support. The scope is inherently unpredictable.
So the government agrees to pay fixed hourly rates for the labor actually used.
Correct. Fixed hourly rates that include everything: wages, overhead, G&A, profit.
Plus the cost of any materials used.
Usually reimbursed at actual cost, though sometimes a small handling fee might be allowed if specified.
Okay, risk profile again. This sounds like the contractor has very little risk, right?
Minimal risk on cost. They're paid for the actual hours they work and the materials they consume. If it takes longer, they bill more hours.
Which means the buyer carries almost all the cost risk. The risk of scope creep or inefficiency leading to huge bills.
That's the trade-off. You get maximum flexibility to address unknown needs, but you take on the risk of potentially unlimited costs if it's not managed carefully.
So how does the government protect itself? This sounds like it could get out of hand fast.
Through very, very close oversight. That's non-negotiable with LH contracts.
Monitoring hours constantly, checking
Yeah.
material usage.
Absolutely. And there's another crucial protection built into the FAR for these.
The ceiling price.
The ceiling price. It's mandatory unless waived at a very high level. The contract must state a maximum amount the government is obligated to pay.
So if the costs are heading towards that ceiling,
The contractor has to notify the government, and they have to stop work when they hit it, unless the government formally raises the ceiling via a contract modification.
that ceiling is the ultimate safety brake on the buyer's liability.
It really is. It forces a decision point. Is the continued effort worth the increased cost?
I can imagine that ceiling price conversation happens quite a lot. It's the key control.
No doubt. It prevents the blank check scenario.
And let's clarify that fixed hourly rate, it's not just the worker's wage, right?
Not at all. It's a fully burdened rate. It has to cover the direct labor cost, plus fringe benefits, plus the contractor's overhead allocation, their general and administrative costs, and their profit margin.
So the government knows the cost per hour is fixed for a certain labor category, but the variable is how many hours will be needed.
Exactly. The rate itself isn't variable day to day, just the quantity of hours purchased.
Okay, practical example.
Think about contracting for on-site IT technicians for urgent troubleshooting. You agree on hourly rates for different skill levels. They come when called, fix the problem, bill for their time, plus any parts they used.
You don't know if you'll need them for 10 hours next month or 100. The LH contract gives you that flexibility to just pay for what you use up to the ceiling.
Perfect example. You're buying rapid response capability for an unknown quantity of work.
So if we pull this all together, we see a clear spectrum.
Definitely. It's really a spectrum of risk and certainty. On one end, you have fixed price, high cost certainty for the buyer, high performance cost risk for the contractor, best suited for really well-defined requirements.
Then way over on the other end, labor hour. Low cost certainty for the buyer, up to the ceiling anyway. Low risk for the contractor. Best for when the scope or amount of labor is truly unknown, but needs heavy oversight.
And sitting there in the middle is FP-LOE.
Fixed cost, but for the effort, not the result. So the buyer accepts the risk on the outcome. Good for R&D, studies, exploration.
It bridges the gap when you know you need dedicated brain power, but can't guarantee what it will find.
So for everyone listening, the acquisition pros, the business folks, what's the big takeaway here?
I think it's that choosing the contract type isn't just an administrative step. It's maybe the first big strategic decision you make.
You're fundamentally deciding how much uncertainty you can tolerate and who's going to pay if things don't go exactly as planned.
Exactly. It's about matching the maturity of your requirement, how well you actually know what you need, to the right mechanism in the FAR. Who bears the risk when the unexpected inevitably happens?
And it's not just about the initial price tag either. There's the administrative cost to consider.
That's a really important point. The effort needed upfront to get those rock-solid requirements for a fixed-price contract.
Versus the ongoing effort needed for that close oversight on a labor hour contract.
Right. Which leads to a final thought maybe for you to consider. How does that administrative burden really compare? Is the intensive long-term monitoring needed for an LH contract actually more resource-intensive for your organization than the heavy lifting required upfront to properly define requirements for an FP contract?
Where are you spending your team's valuable time on deep preparation and planning, or on continuous monitoring and policing?
It's that trade-off between upfront investment for certainty versus ongoing cost for flexibility. There's no single right answer, but it's a crucial strategic question.
That really frames the hidden costs well, something every contracting team needs to weigh. Okay, that gives us a lot to think about regarding these core contract structures. A really helpful breakdown. If you find these podcasts helpful, then reach far for that subscribe button.